was. As you all know, this recession was unique. We lost 416,000 jobs from February of 2020 to April of 2020, outpacing the losses that we suffered over 3 years during the Great Recession in essentially just 2 months. Since then, we've started to regain jobs with a strong recovery from June through October of last year, before suffering a second dip in November and then seeing steady job growth so far this year. Minnesota's job rebound has averaged about 17,000 jobs per month from May of 2020 to August of 2021. In sum, we've regained about 275,000 of the jobs that we lost, putting us back at 95% of our pre-pandemic employment levels. However, this also means that we still have another 145,000 jobs left to gain back, and that will likely take another year or more, depending on several factors. Overall, we're a little bit behind the US recovery, which didn't have that second dip in November, but we've kept pace with the US so far this year. Job growth has been bumpy over the last 16 months. Unprecedented federal pandemic relief spending has helped moderate the bumps, but job growth ebbs and flows have mostly tracked the coronavirus trajectory. The recent surge in Delta variant cases is the latest job growth hurdle, despite more than 70% of Minnesota's 18 and older population being vaccinated by midsummer. Like with the coronavirus, everyone has been affected differently, including across regions, industries, and demographic groups. Minnesota's seasonally adjusted unemployment rate fell slightly to 3.8% in August, while the state's labor force participation rate remained level at 67.8%. Nationally, the unemployment rate dropped in August to 5.2%, with labor force participation holding at 61.7%. In general, unemployment rates in the state are lowest in the southern counties, particularly in southwest Minnesota, and highest in northern Minnesota, particularly in northeast. But still, these rates are way down from the record highs that we hit last May and June, and in several regions, they're actually lower now than they were in August of 2019. And I don't know if you guys can remember back to those days, but at the time, everyone was talking about a tight labor market, and employers were struggling to find workers to fill open jobs. It really, in many ways, feels like forever ago, but we're back into a very similar spot. As is typical in a recession, the number of unemployed workers jumped as high as almost 350,000 unemployed workers in May of 2020. But again, this recession was unique. We never really did see a surge of unemployed people coming into our career force locations throughout the past year. Instead, most layoffs were temporary, and a bunch of other factors have kept people out of the labor force. We've managed to grow back above 3 million available workers in the state, but we're still down more than 85,000 workers compared to pre-pandemic levels. Like everything else, these labor force changes have not been even across the state. Northwest has actually seen a slight labor force increase over the year due to a seasonal economy, a construction boom, and a quicker recovery. Southwest is down the most over the year, but saw the smallest impact from the pandemic recession and is now experiencing the tightest labor market among the 6 regions, with less than 1 job seeker per vacancy reported. Minnesota's labor force participation rate dropped from over 70% to just under 68%, and it has remained stubbornly low even during the recovery. But it should be noted that our participation rate is still much higher than the US rate. Minnesota is well known for our hard work ethic, and that recognition is well deserved. We still ranked 7th highest in the US despite the declines. However, the drop in labor force participation is a major factor holding back Minnesota's job rebound pace over the past 16 months. Demand for workers is great, as indicated by the sky-high job vacancy numbers. There are a variety of reasons contributing to Minnesota's labor force drop-off during the pandemic, including fear of contracting COVID, persistent childcare challenges, uncertainty of in-person schooling, extended UI benefits, location and transportation issues, low wages in some industries, skills mismatches between workers seeking employment and the jobs that have available vacancies, and an uptick in retirement rates have all been cited as reasons why the state's labor force remains below pre-pandemic levels. Another unique aspect of this recession is the disproportionate impact it has had on women, BIPOC, and workers with lower education. In past recessions, male-dominated industries like manufacturing and construction have lost the most jobs, placing a larger burden on male workers, while female-dominated industries like healthcare and social assistance continued to add jobs. However, this recession decimated our leisure and hospitality industry, other services, educational services, and healthcare and social assistance industries, all of which have higher concentrations of female, BIPOC, and less educated workers. In Minnesota, our female labor force participation rate has fallen from a nation-leading 66% to 64.4%. Labor force participation rates are also down for males, but the industries that employ males in larger numbers, such as construction, manufacturing, and agriculture, are all doing relatively well, while female-dominated industries have taken longer to bounce back. This recession has also been much harder on workers of color. At one point last year, over half of the state's Black labor force had at least filed an application for unemployment insurance, and more than a third of American Indians, Asians, and workers of some other race had filed an application. Whites and Hispanics both had well over 1/4 of workers file claims, but displayed a lower share and also had shorter unemployment durations, according to our Profile of Risk for Prolonged Unemployment tool. The Black labor force participation rate dropped fastest, from 71.3% pre-pandemic down to 66.5%, though it is now trending upward. Our data also shows that for workers who are in the labor force, the employment picture is rapidly improving, and participation rates actually increased for Hispanic workers due to strength in industries that tend to employ more Hispanic workers, including agriculture and construction. This graph adds the unemployment rate and the change in the labor force participation rate since February of 2020, prior to the pandemic. This is the total share of Minnesotans who are either actively seeking work or who would have been expected to be working or looking for work if it wasn't for the economic impact of the pandemic. In August, the pandemic adjusted unemployment rate for Black workers in Minnesota was 8.4%, for Hispanic workers was 4.7%, and for white workers was 5.9%. In addition, our Profile of Risk tool also shows that Blacks have experienced the longest average UI duration, followed by mixed race and American Indian workers, with whites and Asians having the shortest spells on UI. Durations were also longer for the oldest workers, for females, for workers with disabilities, and for workers with lower educational attainment. It's also interesting to point out that the Twin Cities had the longest duration on UI of the 6 regions, with Southeast having the shortest time on UI. As we've talked about, this recession has had extremely uneven impacts on different industries. Leisure and hospitality and other services were decimated. Other industries that also saw unprecedented job losses include educational services, administrative support and waste management services, real estate rental and leasing, and information, which had been on a long-term downward trend even before the pandemic. The really surprising difference in this recession was the significant declines in healthcare and social assistance, an industry that had kept growing through the past 2 recessions. In the midst of a global pandemic, you'd expect to see demand for healthcare services go up. But like many other industries, there were short-term shutdowns and slow recoveries as COVID kept people from typical patterns. Industries that seem to do better include agriculture, construction, finance and insurance, and perhaps surprisingly, retail trade. The good news is that many of these industries have started to bounce back. Leisure and hospitality and other services are leading the job gains. Healthcare and social assistance has also recovered, and there may be significant pent-up demand just around the corner if we can get COVID under control. There are a ton of healthcare vacancies right now, but we know that hiring can be a challenge. We haven't seen workers switching industries as easily as we might have expected, especially for people who were laid off from leisure and hospitality and might have skills in personal care and services that could be utilized in healthcare and social assistance. Minnesota short-term jobs forecast for the 1-year period from the second quarter of 2021 to the second quarter of 2022 expects about 100,000 jobs to be added, which is a 3.5% increase over the year. The forecasted job expansion averages out to roughly 8,400 jobs per month, though that is a slowdown compared to the previous monthly gains we've seen since last April. Under the forecasted job growth, the state will have recovered 85% of jobs lost during the pandemic by June of 2022, leaving total employment about 65,000 jobs below the January 2020 level. Not all industries are expected to reach their pre-pandemic employment levels, but other industries have or will be expanding their workforces above pre-pandemic levels, pushing Minnesota wage and salary employment past its pre-pandemic peak by late 2022 or early 2023. If that happens, the 3-year peak to bottom to peak job recovery of the pandemic recession will be shorter than the 4 years needed to fully recover jobs from the 2001 recession and the 5.5 years required to recover all jobs lost during the Great Recession. These tight labor market conditions are likely to be with us for the near future. In the past, the labor pool in Minnesota deepened with a steady stream of new workers, and employers were able to find the talented workers they needed to help them grow. This was due to several factors, including population growth and in-migration, high and rising labor force participation rates for females, rising participation rates for older workers, and a stable flow of high school and college students graduating into the workforce. All of these are important sources of labor force growth. However, the state's labor force growth has slowed considerably. We went from an average of about 41,000 new workers per year in the 1990s to about 12,500 new workers per year in the 2000s, though that time period included 2 recessions, and up to an average of about 15,500 new workers each year in the 2010s. This was buoyed by the longest running economic expansion in modern history, which was only interrupted by the pandemic. But it is important to note that the state was already seeing slower growth due to labor force constraints. Employers are not able to grow if they aren't able to find new workers, especially if those workers need specific skills to fill open jobs. Looking ahead, the state's labor force growth is expected to slow even more, down to an average of only about 7,500 new workers per year over the coming decade. The remnants of this recession may change that even more. A significant portion of the state's labor force growth was projected to be baby boomers staying in the labor force. But if people in the oldest age groups who are dropping out due to COVID concerns decide to retire for good, the state's labor force may grow even more slowly. Like everything else, this shift is definitely going to have disparate impacts across the state. Almost all of the state's labor force growth is projected to happen in the Twin Cities metro area as the population continues to grow and young married couple families and immigrants continue to move in, and older workers stay in the labor force past retirement age. In contrast, even central Minnesota, which had been the fastest growing region of the state for the past couple decades, is projected to see a labor force decline over the next 10 years. Northeast is expected to see the biggest decline due to an already and much less international in-migration. And it's important to note because nearly half of the state's labor force growth over the past decade was from foreign-born residents. So in summary, this has been a recession unlike any other. The decline was much more severe than any past recession. However, I will pass it back to Jeff and be available for questions. Thank you.
That's perfect, Cameron. We're going to go ahead and allow questions after our other speaker on this topic. So if you could stay tuned, that'd be great. So we're also joined today by Coellen Ellengerd. She's a senior partner at McKinsey, and she will share insights on the future of work in Minnesota. Coellen has researched this issue at length, and we're thrilled to hear from her today.
Great. Thank you all. I'm going to take a forward-looking view, a few years out, 5 to 10 years out, and then take it a little bit closer to home, a couple of years out at the national level, at the state level, and then at the Minneapolis-St. Paul MSA level as well. So if you flip to the next page, 3 main topics: the future of work and how automation and COVID are affecting occupations and the skills that we're all going to need across all occupations in the future. What we project the economic recovery to look like, both at the national level, the Minnesota level, and the MSP level. And then diversity in the workplace and the impact of COVID on a couple of different groups, as Cameron already started to show. So let's jump in. Over the last few months, we've done quite a bit of research through McKinsey Global Institute on what are the trends that existed pre-COVID that have been accelerated during COVID and we think are likely to persist and really shape the future of work going forward. So think of this as what's shaping 5 to 10 years out and the workforce that we're going to need and the economy that we're going to need. Bucket number 1 of trends that are going to persist, no shock to this group, remote work, virtual meetings, and travel. We think we're going to have a fair amount more of work from home compared to pre-COVID levels. Business travel will likely be down about 20%, we think, compared to pre-COVID levels. And leisure travel, after an initial bump of sort of revenge travel, if you will probably settle back into pre-COVID levels of leisure travel. The second category shaping our future of work is e-commerce and virtual transaction. A lot more e-commerce delivery, food and grocery delivery, even business-to-business sales and marketing has shifted online and will persist at a much higher level than pre-COVID. Online education, particularly for older age groups, much more than younger age groups, and telemedicine, at least for some categories of ailments. And the third category that I'm going to dig into a little bit more is automation and artificial intelligence. This has really accelerated, particularly as we think about jobs and occupations that needed a lot of in-person interaction. That's where we've seen automation and digital really accelerate even more than before. So on the next page, what do we know about automation and how it affects different jobs and skills? We took a look at 800 different occupations. We took them down to the individual activities that happen within each of those 800 occupations. And we asked 2 questions. Based on the technology that exists today, could this feasibly be automated, number 1? And number 2, based on the salary of the person doing that job today, is it worth it to automate the work? Does it make business sense? And based on the answers of those 2 questions, we said, here's the spectrum of automatable activities and how they aggregate up into those 800 occupations. And a couple examples, just to give you a sense of the full spectrum. At the 100% range on the left end here, sewing machine operators, assembly line workers, 100% of their tasks can be automated. Store clerks, travel agents, most of it, but not all of it. On the other end of the spectrum, psychiatrists, legislators, chief executives, more in the 10 or so % range of their work. And somewhere in the middle, bus drivers, surgeons, engineers, right? Automation can help their work a lot, but not completely automate it. And when you step back from all of this, about 2/3, 60 or so % of the occupations have at least 30% of their activities and time that could be automated away. So it is changing the majority of jobs, but not eliminating totally many of the jobs altogether. So we're going to need to change and adjust in our future of work. So on the next page, what we did is we took not just the automation baseline that we've had for many years at the occupation level, but we also combined that with COVID. And we say, wow, when you take these 2 things together, oftentimes they're affecting the very same jobs, the very same activities. But when you add them together, how does that affect occupations? And what you see here on the left is the biggest gainers in terms of occupations that are growing a lot. And on the right side, the biggest losers in terms of occupations that are shrinking a lot and causing a lot of displacement, retraining. On the left side, no surprise, health aides, technicians, health professionals, STEM professionals, transportation services, all both growing in the double digits, some in the 20 to 30% range, and a significant boost based on COVID. This is at the national level now. We'll talk about Minnesota in a moment, but about 1 million more jobs nationally that will be in these categories going forward. You see a high growth rate for creatives and arts management, but frankly, it's off a very low base. So I would focus on those other 4 categories there in terms of biggest gainers. On the biggest losers, office support, which is largely assistance, 1 million less jobs when you layer on COVID. Customer service and sales, as Cameron was talking about, a big impact during COVID, shrinking by 8%, and 3 million additional jobs based on COVID that will, we don't think, be around over the next 5 to 10 years. Similarly, in food services, not just waiters, waitresses, but also bartenders, another 1 million jobs in addition, given COVID. So a lot of disruption and changing within different occupations. On the next page, though, it will also, within each occupation, change the nature of skills that we need. On the bottom 3 rows, you'll see we need a lot fewer skills in physical and manual work, right? Can I move something from here to here? Basic cognitive work. So can I do, basic rules following and apply those rules for simple judgment? Also about the same, give or take, higher cognitive work, which would be more problem solving. And we're going to need a lot more of the skills in the top two rows, the blue bars here. We're going to need a lot more social and emotional skills. So can I read a human interaction and react accordingly, or can I show empathy at a moment of truth? And technological skills, which isn't just can I code, but can I interact with technology effectively? Can I monitor technology, and when the conveyor belt isn't working, can I follow the directions in this app and replace the filter, right? So lots of different types of technological skills that we'll need a lot more of. So as we think about reskilling, upskilling, even just keeping pace in our current occupations, those two skills are going to be increasingly important. So that's the quick tour of what we're going to need 5 to 10 years out. I wanted to shift next in terms of our second topic to what does the forward-looking economy and recovery look like? And Cameron touched on this a bit, so I'll just hit the highlights briefly. We've done a lot of modeling in partnership with Oxford Economics across a range of scenarios, and they basically vary on the y-axis of how controlled is the virus, is COVID, and on the x-axis, how effective is our policy and economic response. And there's a series of different scenarios that appear to be more and more plausible, more and more likely as we go, anchoring primarily around A1 here in the middle, but there could be a bit of a W recovery in B4 or A2, depending on how this unfolds. Actually, if you flip ahead 2 pages in the interest of time, if we take the A1 scenario for a moment, what we're looking at is, as Cameron described, a 2022, late 2022 recovery. I think the good news is that Minneapolis-St. Paul will actually recover about a quarter earlier than the overall US average, but Minnesota as a state overall will recover about a quarter after it. So US is slated to recover in 2022 Q3, Minneapolis-St. Paul as an MSA 1 quarter earlier, Q2, and Minnesota as a state, given rural and outstate areas, in Q4. So just kind of keep that in mind in urban rural settings. Of course, this is based on the different mix of occupations and access. Next page, you'll see that a bit more geographically, right? Different regions based on kind of net job growth. Overall, Minnesota net job growth projected at 4% based on our latest models. And actually this is hot off the press and came out yesterday. So I do have, if it's helpful to this group at any point, MSA specific data and county specific data in terms of future job projections based on job mix and all of that. We can discuss at a future date. But that's basically at the state level and at the MSA level, a bit of the variation that you see. And then on the next page, you'll see, again, the biggest gainers and losers. And Marcus, are you able to see this now? I know also we're going to be distributing these materials after, so you can certainly see it at that point. But what you'll see here is change in net employment, COVID, and the impact of future automation across occupations. I also have this cut by industry, so happy to do that. As you know, you can be a health professional, but in a couple of different industries, or you can be a technology specialist, but in a couple of different industries. This is the occupational view, though, and you see similar patterns, but a little bit of variability between the Minnesota state view and the Minneapolis-St. Paul, more MSA view, with different growth rates in each there. When you step back from all of this, what does it mean? It means a heck of a lot of job displacement. About 17 million people, workers across the country, are going to need to completely change jobs or change occupations. About 15 million of that 17 million are going to need to change occupations completely. And what we know when people need to change occupations is that the time out of the workforce, the time required for reskilling, retraining, upskilling is a lot more, and the transitions are much more challenging. You add to that some of what Cameron was describing earlier, where when women are out of the workforce, that unemployment tends to be stickier, people of color, and so there's a lot of transition and disruption that we're foreseeing. This is the data for Minnesota specifically. We also very similar patterns that you would see in the Minneapolis-St. Paul data. On the left side, almost 300,000 transitions are going to be needed from declining occupations. So back to the customer service and sales, the food service, the office support, and production work being the 4 largest categories. Together, that's about 80 to 85% of the job displacements. And then transitions growing to growing occupations, another about 50,000. So how do we make sure that that is seamless? It is a one-step transition versus a two-step. I exit this, maybe retrain for something else that I don't get, and then again, retrain for more of a growing occupation. Hopefully, we can create that career path from the shrinking to the growing occupations to be much more seamless. And finally, last piece in this second section here, I would suggest that we start to map and understand of the jobs, and this is the state of Minnesota data, where there is the most displacement. You see the displacement rate, you see the thousands of jobs that are being displaced in retail salespeople, office clerks, cashiers, et cetera, and the percent of the workforce here in the state of Minnesota. How does that, what's the heat map by gender, by age, by race, ethnicity, so that we can better understand and target some of those retraining, upskilling programs? So that's it for the highlights and the insights on that second piece of what is the future economic outlook look like? How does that affect different occupations differently? The last piece is a bit of a deeper dive, exactly where Cameron was going a little bit earlier, but also forward-looking. This is the talent pipeline across Fortune 1000 in the U.S. What you see if you look at the third row from the bottom, the latest data is being released in a week or two. But what you see is that women make up almost half of the entry-level workers, but then drop down to about 21% in the C-suite. Similarly, and even more extreme, women of color start at 18% of the entry level and drop down to 3% of the C-suite. So this would be Black, Latina, and Asian women all added together. So given that is the starting point, actually, if you flip 4 steps ahead to page 17, at least in my material, how do we combine what is the current state with what is that economic recovery in the future? And I think the challenge is there are significant gaps in the workplace by gender, by race, and unfortunately, COVID is further exacerbating these. So as we look ahead to that economic recovery that we were just talking about, what we see is that men will recover sometime in 2023, as we were just talking about, late 2022, 2023. Women, though, will take about 18 months longer, not to recover to full equality, that would be decades away, but to get back to pre-COVID levels of inequality will take women 18 months longer. By race and ethnicity, Asians a little bit earlier. For Blacks, it's very bimodal, right? There's one segment of a number of occupations that have a high Black concentration. Healthcare, frontline recovering much more quickly. And then there's other customer service and sales, food service, where Blacks are more highly concentrated. That will take a very long time to recover if they ever do to full levels. Also, education and income, if you look at those cuts, those two are highly correlated in our economy and every economy. It will take somebody with less than a high school degree or less than a college degree about 2, maybe even 3 years longer to get back to pre-COVID levels of inequality. Same thing for those making less than 35, 50,000. So those challenges are quite acute in our economy and I think worth thinking through as you think about ways to accelerate our recovery. I might, with that, if you flip back one page, the reasons for that aren't only in some of the concentrations by occupation, although that is a big part of it. But Cameron also started to touch on some of the different experiences that people have had. 3 particular groups that have had disproportionate impact during COVID from a job perspective. Just a quick couple highlights here. Mothers, and particularly mothers of young children. We've seen in some of our early data, about 40% of mothers added 15 hours a week or more, a very healthy part-time job, to their weekly schedule, versus 27% of fathers. And 1 in 4 mothers worried that their performance was being negatively judged as a result of that. So more mothers have stepped out of the workforce. Many of you saw the December nationwide data, where 1.1, or the September, data, where 1.1 people left or were fired from the U.S. workforce. 80% of them in September, last September, were women as schools went back largely remotely. So that has had a hugely disproportionate impact. Black women also have been disproportionately affected, not just from a job perspective, but also from a health perspective. The majority of Black women are the only Black women on their team. We've seen from broader research that they're 1.6 times more likely to hear demeaning remarks about Black women. But here's the challenging part. They're almost 3 times, 2.5 times more likely to experience the death of a loved one during COVID, but at the same time, 1.5 times less likely feeling comfortable sharing that at work, right? Bringing their full authentic selves to work. As a result, both Black men and Black women have been more likely to step out of the workforce or consider downshifting, shifting from a full-time to a part-time role. Similarly, for senior level women, there's been a lot more pressure to work longer hours, to be always on, and over half have felt consistently exhausted. So as we think about recovery, yes, there's the economic numbers, but there's also the different ways in which COVID in a workplace has affected different groups. And I'll wrap it up if you flip ahead just a couple pages. There have been some national, just to the next page with the Walmart logo as an example. Mine might have a lag. If you go one page back, sorry about that. There have been, I think, national examples of great at-scale, large reskilling and upskilling efforts. If you think about the 17 million people across this country, the 300 or so thousand that we talked about in the state of Minnesota who are going to need to switch occupations, how do you do this at scale? This is a scale that we've never fully achieved before. So a few examples to draw from, a lot more, I think, here in terms of public-private sector partnerships and other innovative approaches that this group could explore. Walmart's invested about $4 billion over 4 years to upskill their employees from frontline staff all the way to the managers. JP Morgan Chase announced a 5-year, $350 million commitment on innovative training. Google and Coursera have partnered, Northrop Grumman and University of Maryland. There's a lot of interesting educational corporate partnerships and at-scale examples here that I think this group could hopefully draw from. And I'll wrap it up before we just open it up for questions with a few considerations. If you flip to the next page or the last page, I think it's worth thinking through what are the elements of our economy that are going to recover almost by themselves. As time evolves, they are going to naturally recover to their pre-COVID levels, and hopefully sooner rather than later, as we were just describing. But there are some elements and areas of the economy that need, I think, particular focus, or it's going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 years longer to get back to pre-COVID levels of inequality. And we can't afford to further exacerbate the gaps that we already have in our community. Are there ways that we could leapfrog, right, to just one step, a 2 or 3 step change so that we have less occupational disruption? What are the national best practices that we can draw from? And how can we have more at-scale retraining and upscaling so that we can get to that future state in a more seamless way for all of our citizens? With that, turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. We have a couple minutes for questions for either Cameron or Quellen from any of our council members.
Hi, this is Nonoko Sato. I'm wondering, as you are collecting information about the racial and ethnic diversity of the workforce, is the Asian American population further disaggregated? Because there is a discrepancy between the Asian American communities in terms of how disproportionate they're being affected by all the different things that's happening right now.
Cameron, I don't know if you have additional data. We are actually currently just launching this, so it will be a while, at least a few months until we have deeper insights. We are launching a race in the workplace benchmarking that will detail that at a much more granular level, but as of now, unfortunately, no.
Yeah, we're in a similar situation. The monthly CPS data that we receive from BLS does not have a breakdown for Asian or other Pacific Islanders in the state of Minnesota. The sample size is simply too small. So then we rely on the more detailed data that we can get from the Census Bureau. So like what we'll be receiving here in the next couple months, we'll have that information, but it'll be from 2020. So there's always going to be a time lag, which makes us less responsive, unfortunately.
Barty, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. I guess sort of to piggyback on Noko's question, I'm also just curious about immigration status, right? And so I'm just curious if that data is present as well.
I do not have any of that data. The data that we largely ground this on is women in the workplace and race in the workplace, which is self-reported by employers. You can imagine they're not reporting any of that data from an HR policy perspective. So it is incomplete in that way. I don't know if others have more detailed data.
Yeah, again, we would rely on information from the Census Bureau on the immigration status of workers in Minnesota. And I think you had someone from the Minnesota State Demographic Center last meeting. They would have the same information as well.
Thank you.
I'm curious to understand, have within the data that you've seen over the past 18 months, has there been any declines in income in any of those specific groups that have stayed employed or have transitioned from unemployment to employed? Thinking about just average annual income and things like that, anything that we can glean from what's going on in the economy?
I have not seen kind of longitudinal data. Unfortunately, most of what we see is, different snapshots. So you have kind of a snapshot 18, 9 months ago, et cetera. So I know that there are challenges in terms of, many that had full-time work before. Some have reported drops in that, and so they've shifted to part-time work, or they had employment that offered health insurance and health benefits before, and they've now shifted to more kind of contract work, for instance. But that is more piecemeal and not kind of a full longitudinal view, unfortunately.
Well, I think we'll thank Cameron and Quellen for their participation here today, and we can move on to our next section. Before we go, though, to our next panel, I have a couple quick things for the group. First of all, if we could ask council members to have your cameras on as often as possible. If you need to turn them off briefly, that's fine. So we're, kind of basic protocols: camera on, mic off, and then we'll kind of go from there. And then secondly, all of us had the opportunity at the first meeting to kind of introduce ourselves and lay out our top or number one priority or first priority that we wanted the group to potentially consider. But we were missing one of our members, and it's Scott Burns, the co-founder and CEO of Structural. So Scott, if you want to take a minute and allow the group to have your insights as well, that would be terrific.
Sure. Well, it's great to be here. I really enjoyed reading everybody else's perspective. So thanks for the opportunity to share. I run a software company in St. Paul that helps people thrive at work. So we're thinking about some of these issues in our day-to-day. I was also, just by way of background, born and raised in Duluth, lived in St. Paul for 20 years. I've been most interested over the past 10 years in my daily work and in my community work in this sort of idea of just removing bottlenecks for people to create these pipelines for individuals into more prosperous work. And so just listening to Quaylen's presentation really gets me thinking. And, my work's varied from thinking about coding schools, a little bit of work on manufacturing apprenticeships, which I'm really passionate about, improving career pathways into entrepreneurship. So we launched a BIPOC and LGBTQ focused accelerator in St. Paul called Lunar Startup, some of you might be familiar with. And even just focusing on mentoring programs to try and create the interventions that move people into better jobs that are going to be more prosperous, more stable, better incomes, better wealth building, et cetera. So I'm most focused on that and just excited to have the chance to participate in thinking about these once-in-a-lifetime investments with all of you.
Thanks so much, Scott. We'll go ahead with our panel now. So it's my pleasure to introduce our three panelists. First of all, we'll welcome Mayor Marv Calvin of Willmar. Mayor Calvin has been on the front lines of community response over the last year and a half, and we look forward to hearing details on his lived experience guiding the city of Willmar during the pandemic. We're also excited to have Renee Dossman of the Neighborhood Development Center. The NDC is a nonprofit community development financial institution. The organized provides integrated business services to connect entrepreneurs while tying their businesses to the local neighborhood. And then lastly, we appreciate having Ruby Lee with us. She is the president of Clues, which is Minnesota's largest Latino-led organization. And she brings a breadth of experience in helping Latino individuals and families to find economic support and employment coaching during the pandemic. So welcome to all three of you. And I think what we're going to start with, we're going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves and take a few minutes to share with us about your lived experience over the last 18 months. And we'll maybe go ahead and start with Mayor Marv Calvin.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share a little bit today. And for those of you that don't know where Willmar is, we're about 100 miles west of Minneapolis-St. Paul. We're a regional center, and a regional center means that we have job growth, we have job opportunities, we have health care, and we have shopping experiences that people are able to come to Willmar to experience. And Willmar is a thriving community, and it's been said time and time again that if you want to know what the state of Minnesota will look like in 10 to 20 years, take a look at where Willmar is today. And I think when you look at the report that we'll be giving today, I think that you'll see that a lot of those synergies do come true, and that Willmar is an exciting place to be. There's a lot of really great things happening in Willmar. But I think the best way to start it is really to share an example of a local lady that lives here in Willmar, and her name is Nadia Yuza. And a little bit about Nadia is that Nadia came to the United States in 2012. She was raised in Morocco, and she is a citizen of the United States now. She is striving to achieve the American dream for herself and her 3 children. She speaks English, Arabic, and French. She attends Ridgewater College, and currently she works in the elementary school, but what she wants to do is get into healthcare and advance her degree so that she can better prepare for her 3 daughters, ages 1, 8, and 9. People like Nadia are the reason that we're really doing the work we do here in Willmar. We try to surround ourselves with good people. We try to lift up good people, and then we try to give them the tools they need to better themselves. We're very fortunate that we have Ridgewater College here, one of the junior colleges, technical schools right here in Willmar, so that if people want to come to Willmar and they want to expand their education base, they can. And in speaking with the president, Craig Johnson, in regards to Ridgewater, they're doing a good job of reaching out to our diverse communities, but yet there's still work to be done on that front. And we really need to look at how can we lean forward into that and really say, how can we engage our people, our newcomers to Willmar, to want to actually advance their education. I think the interesting thing about Nadia is that she already speaks 3 different languages, and most of us, myself included, only speak 1. The city of Willmar saw great growth, about over 7% growth in the last census, and we were one of the highest growing communities in the last census. We're very diverse, and our diverse community brings great strength to us here in Willmar. Of our new businesses, we have 12 businesses that are owned by diverse individuals, and we have 48 businesses that are owned by Latinos, East Africans, and Asians. Today, Willmar has an estimated 91 businesses owned by diverse individuals within our community. And I think that's one of the strengths of Willmar. When I grew up in Willmar, I graduated from high school here, and when I graduated, the downtown was thriving. There were a lot of great things happening. Well, today our downtown is thriving again, but it looks different than it used to look. Like other outstate cities, we have a huge crisis around housing because we have the jobs. And so we've worked very diligently over the last 3 years. And during the pandemic, that was very difficult to do, to look at job creation and look at ways that we can increase our housing, because we knew that we had to have housing. If we had the jobs and we had housing, we could mirror the 2, and then we'd see growth throughout our community. So we've been very fortunate that we've been able to bring a number of multifamily housing projects to the table. We have those projects now under works. One of our projects was looking at a 4-building expansion that they thought they would probably do over 5 to 10 years, and they'll actually be doing all of those projects over a 3-year time frame just because of the need for housing in Willmar. We also have a Renaissance zone which is addressing the lowest income, most impoverished area of Willmar. And in that Renaissance zone, we actually have a 56-unit workforce housing project going into that, and that'll be our first project built within that system. That is an idea that was brought forward. We kind of mirrored it after what Fargo did up there. And so we're giving whack and sack fees at no cost, building permits at no cost, and a number of other incentives that we are giving to developers in that area to try to decrease that economic disparity that we have there. Along with housing and workforce is childcare, and we've been working diligently on our childcare side of things. Up in Spicer, which is a community to our north by about 6 miles, they opened the new childcare center. But right here in Willmar, we have opened a East African childcare center, and we're working on getting that off the plate as well and getting that moving. So we are very fortunate to have a lot of economic development happening here in Willmar. We really feel real proud about that. We have a logistics company that will be breaking ground yet this month. And then we also have Epitopics, which is a organization that does animal vaccine, and they'll be looking at a $10 to $20 million expansion right in Willmar. And DEED provided a grant of $1.3 million to help us with our sewer connection out to that. So we're very appreciative of that. So what are some of my key takeaways from the pandemic? The pandemic allowed people to be by themselves and be lonely. And we have worked really hard at trying to connect people with people in safe environments, in a masked environment. I'm a strong proponent of the vaccine. I'm a strong proponent of still wearing masks, but we made that okay for people to do that in environments to do that where they could feel comfortable doing that. So we need to get our people back to work. Our Jennie-O Turkey Store here in town has over 800 job openings right now. And LSI, which is, they have over 225 jobs open right now in Willmar. So we need immigration reform so that with immigration reform, we can take and bring our refugees, our people of other countries to the workforce and get them to work. Because when I go back to Nadia's story that I told you in the beginning, people want to come to America, they want to work hard, they want to get the job done because they want life better for their children. The same as every one of us on this call today, we all want things better for our families. So what happens and how do we recruit those new workers? We have to work with our Hispanic populations, our East African, and in Willmar, we're very fortunate that we have a number of the Karen people that work here as well. And some of the things and the tools that we put together around that is that we came out with an anti-racism statement that all people would feel welcome in Willmar and Willmar would be a welcoming community. And that anti-racism statement basically says, everybody is welcome in Willmar. You'll be treated with respect and dignity. And if you're not, the leaders of this community want to know about it because we want to correct it. I'm going to give you one example of a program that was instituted in Willmar, and it was a poultry training program. It was a collaboration between the University of Minnesota, Ridgewater College, and our local turkey producers. That was a program that we are working diligently on. And as every new program has, it does have a few stumbling stones to it, but we certainly want to see this program move forward because it takes our poultry workers from the manual labor side and gives them the tools over 2 to 4 years to come into a management position to where they will be able to instill those leadership skills to move themselves forward. So as I stated in my opening comments, I'm very proud of Willmar. I think we've done some really heavy lifting, and I really like the work that you are all doing. And my number one thing is we need to get our people back to work. Our people want to work, and our families want to be integrated and brought back into that system as well. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Marv. Renee, would you go next?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Renee Dossman, president of the Neighborhood Development Center. I just wanted to start off in gratitude and just thank you for your work and your commitment to this and for inviting me to speak. I don't know if you want me to go through the realities or any of that stuff, Jeff, but I'll just quickly do the update on the lived experience. And I can't come here and lie. It's been tough. It's been really tough. It's been tough for our entrepreneurs. I wish I could have gotten here earlier to see the data that was presented, because you guys know how tough it's been from the data, because it doesn't lie. But I tell you, what I've seen is some resiliency and some grit and some hope from our entrepreneurs. They don't give up, and they don't ask for much. They just want fair access, easy access, fair access, and an opportunity. NDC has been around for 30 years. We were founded by a man named Mahalo Tamale. We provide training for entrepreneurs. We focus on entrepreneurs of color from the low to lowest income areas in the metro. We do training. We do technical assistance. So we help you start your business. We help you with marketing, accounting, technology. We also are a CDFI, a community development financial institution. So we provide loans, but they're not based on your credit score. They're based on your character and your commitment to the community. And then finally, we have incubators. So our largest incubator where you can start your business is the Midtown Global Market. And we have a new building that we're building on the corner of University and Dale that's going to have a new incubator space, as well as our NDC offices. We have several other incubators located in St. Paul. So I can say to you that while it's been tough, NDC was able to do some great things this past. One of the things we've trained about 266 new entrepreneurs last year. 77% of them were Black, 55% were women, and as I've stated, 90% were low to extremely low income. In addition, we had over 40 business workshops. We needed to do some workshops in the beginning to, while you were in that little bit of a downtime, if you will, to start thinking more strategically about your business. So often our entrepreneurs are focused. They're just in the work, they're not thinking about working on their business. So we gave some workshops to help them think through that. And to be honest with you, help them also think through if they wanted to close their businesses and how they could do that in the most effective way. We approved over 35 business loans totaling $3 million. We extended about 76 PPP loans, which was $2.5 million. Thank you to the state and to everyone. We were able to process about 625 emergency and relief grants totaling $7.5 million. So I do want to say and acknowledge that one of the things that I remember about this past 18 months is the beginning. The beginning when it all started, and I thought I'd be back to work in a week. And when I realized that, oh, actually now it's almost 2 years later and I'm still not there. But I do remember us coming together as a team. And I do remember us coming together as a state. And I can honestly say I was so proud of this state, because you guys, we came together in a way that we hadn't done it before and broke down all the barriers and had all the players in the room so that we could move quickly. And we did move quickly. And one of the caveats that I'll talk about when my time is up to talk about the realities is that sometimes we move too quickly and we leave people out. And our entrepreneurs can't move that fast. We don't have the technology. Some of the materials maybe aren't in their first language. So even though we need to move quickly, we also need to slow down and make sure that we are bringing them along. We provided over 7,300 hours last year of technical assistance to over 500 small businesses. The technical assistance morphed though, right? Like it moved into them not having websites. So if you didn't have a website and your business was closed, how could you communicate with your customers? So we needed to get their websites up to speed. The TA is morphing into something that I'll talk about that's a key reality, is the mental wellness of our entrepreneurs. It's one thing just to focus on your business, but this pandemic, as you guys are well aware, has leveled us all out, right? And shown us some things about ourselves. And our entrepreneurs are no exception. So we started a program called Mindset Reset because we knew that our entrepreneurs need support for their mental wellness, because that's just as important. We continue to manage the incubator spaces. I mentioned that we own the Midtown Global Market. You can only imagine that being the epicenter after the murder of George Floyd, the unrest that ensued there. But those entrepreneurs are resilient. We raised some money to keep those rents, to reduce the rents by 50%. We had support from DEED to provide a cultural mall grant, which we're really grateful for. We've done direct assistance and direct grants to those entrepreneurs to take the difference between their 2019 and 2020 sales and give them some direct dollars so that they could keep going. And a lot of them are still there. And we have new businesses that are starting. So I don't come to you today like sad or any of that. I come to you today full of hope. I come to you today saying, let's do it. Let's think innovatively. How can we think differently about how we come together in solidarity to accomplish some of these issues? Because our entrepreneurs won't let us give up. They won't. And as a result of that, we just keep plugging along and pushing forward. And we just want to make sure that we remove the roadblocks for them being able to excel and to exceed and to create the generational wealth that they deserve to create.
Thank you so much. Ruby, why don't you go ahead, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ruby Lee. I'm Director of CLUS, Comunidades Latinas Unidas en Servicio, in English, Latino Communities United in Service. As stated before, we are the largest Latino-led organization today. We were created 40 years ago, specifically to address the needs of Latinos and to ensure that Latinos, because of cultural reasons or other, were not excluded from participating in the economic and social well-being of the state of Minnesota. So 40 years later, here we are. And as we were working very consistently on addressing some of the inequities that many of you know that before the pandemic, Minnesota was already suffering through disinvestment in BIPOC communities, and also the disparities were growing already larger. A few years back, Latino students in Minneapolis had the worst graduation rate in the country. Home ownership, as you know, for BIPOC communities, we were number 49, while mainstream majority community were number 1 in the country. So I've been working at this, addressing disparities for many years with many colleagues of other nonprofits of BIPOC communities. Today, I want to address, just for context, I want to share that Latinos in Minnesota are over 300,000, about 310,000 according to the census, and we know it's more than that because many people don't count or don't fill out the census forms. But we have 300,000 Latinos over, and we are one of the fastest growing populations and the youngest population, or one of the youngest populations. Half of the population in the Latino community today are under the age of 20. So as such, this is the opportunity where we are looking not only our organization, but as a community in Minnesota, we need to think about how do we invest in these young people, not only Latinos, but other BIPOC groups that are experiencing the fastest growth, and look at them as the workers of tomorrow. We know that Minnesota is not growing in numbers, but our communities of color are. So you have been hearing all this information, but I want to restate that that's critically important, and I have not seen a lot of investment in our young people as we should invest together. The questions that we were asked to address today focus particularly in what are some of the lived experiences over the last 18 months. So not only did we suffer from economic inequity in the last decade for sure, but also the COVID-19 and the coronavirus came to exacerbate the need for our services and our work. Primarily, we saw thousands of people today just in economic prosperity, which includes housing, employment, and financial assistance for economic emergency. We served over 10,000 people just in the last 18 months. As many of my colleagues here, we had to, turn around in 1 week, begin to provide services. Our office focuses as well in health and mental health and chemical health, which has impacted a lot of workers and has impacted our youth and many in the community. But we also saw an increase for demand on those services, particularly bilingual, bicultural services, which is very, very much underfunded. Housing, we continue to be in the crisis, and we expect that, a lot of foreclosures and other economic impact we will be seeing in Minnesota as soon as the governor protection is lifted. We are seeing already people leaving their homes and so forth. Employment, we experienced many situations in which people who have never accessed even our services at CLUS as a nonprofit, much less government services, have lost their job after 25 years working, for example, at a hotel, in the hotel industry. And they were loyal workers, they had secure job, they had purchased their home, and then all of a sudden they're faced with no food, no cash, and no ability to pay for their mortgage payment. So through investment, intentional investment that the state has provided, and through our partnerships with cities and counties, we have been able to support them, but we know that's temporarily. So as a community, we took a step back from helping people become economically stable and move them into economic mobility. There's a step back that we need to catch up with. Access to healthy food, access to healthcare have been, we have served thousands of people with particular interest in the cultural work that we bring. We have offices in St. Paul, Minneapolis, Willmar, Austin, Minnesota, and Mankato. In greater Minnesota, the need for services continues to grow, and we just don't have the ability to expand or bring to scale programs to St. Cloud and Duluth and other areas where we have high demand for our services because of the cultural and linguistic approach that we bring to our work. With this work, then, I just want to bring a message, I guess, to the council that we need to invest. I have certainly done it, and other colleagues in BIPAC communities have been working to make our voices heard and ask that we right the wrong, and we invest directly in these underserved communities that are critical more than ever. If you want to see it as the future workers of Minnesota, as the consumers of Minnesota, there's tons of organizations coming to us, and certainly coming to CLUS today. I can tell you of at least 4 or 5 groups that have come to me and saying, we have 2,300 openings in manufacturing in my company. Where do I get 2,300 people? And that's a repeated story. It's not unique. And so we're tailoring now unique partnerships in trying to align people into these new jobs, these new opportunities where employers are going to have to invest in making a difference. So we need structural change. We need targeted direct investment in organizations that are trusted and close to these underserved communities. Some of the key takeaways that we were asked to address, certainly, and I will address specifically my organization, although I think it applies for a lot of BIPAC communities. It is a need for investment in BIPAC-led nonprofits. Even at the national level, we have been advocating for that, and the Biden administration has included nonprofits. Too often, we get overseen, and the investment then becomes in state agencies. And while they're trying to build their capacity, the crisis economically is out in the street. We have the trust of our communities. They come to us. And so investing in the nonprofit sector is also an investment in these communities specifically. Reskilling, retooling, and employment, and alleviating some of these specific trainings that will help people move into economic stability and economic mobility are key going forward. Investment in technology, broadband access, and online education. Paid internships for career pathways or on-the-job training are great opportunities. As I said before, Latinos in Minnesota are almost half of the total population are under the age of 20. Through paid internships, career pathways, or on-the-job training for adults and youth, we will together help ensure that we retain communities here. At the national level, there's a scarcity for employees. And if we don't fight to keep them here, we're going to lose some. Because I'm an employer as well. We have 115 people in our staff, and believe you me, that it's getting very difficult to find skilled Latino workers that have the skills when they can move to Florida or other states where the weather is better. So the investment is needed today. Authentically engage Latinos in the economic recovery and the future economic growth of the state. Again, it's no secret that Latinos are today and will be in the coming years. Latinos in Minnesota are expected to grow to over 500,000 in 14 years. And so we need to invest in engaging these communities and my community certainly to be representative, particularly at this table. Somebody can correct me, but as far as I know, there's no Latino voice at the table. And I strongly encourage this group to really ensure that you advise the governor to increase intentional inclusion of Latino voices and experiences in this group. Lastly, the question about what would have the greatest impact? Again, building economic mobility for low-skilled workers and upscale workers who need to switch occupations. That's critically important. It is very costly to train people, for example, for transportation. As an example, a commercial driver's license costs a student. Right now we're working in Wilmer in Austin, and it costs a student $6,500 just to take the training. That doesn't include any of our costs for staff support and so forth. So the investment needs to be large, it needs to be intentional, and this is where we're going to get some of the workers, the people that are here. Developing aggregated data and research about Latino workers, I think, is critical. I've been in this community as an immigrant 40 years ago, and I always hear, like, we don't have that data. We don't have that data because the numbers are too small. Well, when you're talking about 500,000 people in Minnesota, we're larger than any of the cities in the metro area, or we will be soon. And so I think we need to start creating that data soon. Investing in affordable housing and the inventory or low-income housing for low-income families, addressing childcare issues because workers cannot go to work if they don't have affordable childcare and affordable housing, and also helping to build the infrastructure and the real estate ownership for small businesses in our BIPAC-led institutions so that we can have a sense of belonging and we can authentically engage in community and neighborhood development. If we own our property, we will be more invested.
Yes.
Thank you for your time.
Jeff, can I just say something?
Yeah, please.
I didn't realize we were going through our realities. I thought we were just answering the first question, but I do want to make sure that I highlight exactly what Ruby mentioned. One of the trends that we're seeing with our entrepreneurs is that they want to own their own properties. They no longer want to rent. And so how do we create opportunities for them to be able to do that? I know there's some new funding that's coming through, but I can already tell you we have a list of entrepreneurs that's longer than the money that's going to be available to us to help them with this, with even just doing repairs and maintenance on their existing properties if they do own. So, and also for us as an organization, I thought Ruby mentioned a great point, capacity building for the nonprofits. Understanding that this trend is in existence, that our entrepreneurs want to own. We at NDC, we do real estate, so then now we have to try to find some additional resources to help us to be able to scale up, to help the entrepreneurs, and there's usually not funding that's provided for that. I do want to mention too, I love the examples that were shared about the partnership with corporate America as it relates to some different things that they're doing. We have seen an increase in volunteerism, but not volunteerism just saying, can I come and stroll along the market, but like how can I use my gifts and my talents to help you move the organization forward? And I think that has been extremely helpful. We had Optum that actually helped us design our Mindset Reset program. We had Target that came and helped us actually recreate our website for the Midtown Global Market. So not using your gifts and your talents. So how can we do more of that? And so the thing that I think could have the greatest impact is, in solidarity, how do we look at things from the standpoint of how we can innovate and use design thinking and not just keep thinking that the same way that we've always approached these problems is going to be the way that it's going to solve them, because it's not working, because the disparities are not getting any smaller. And so what we've been doing in our organization is testing. It's like, we don't have to have it all perfectly buttoned up to roll it out. Let's take a couple entrepreneurs, let's try it, let's test it, let's keep perfecting it, and then let's roll it out. So how can we get that kind of innovative process running in our state where we're doing that? And how do we do things where we're not pitting each other against each other? Because being new to this, I've been in this space now for 2 years. I come from corporate America, worked at Target for over 20 years. I've never seen anything like this before. So it's not a zero-sum mentality from my perspective. It's how do we all work together and not, I need to be against this organization because they're doing this work. It's like, there's really enough issues and enough problems to go around for us to figure out how to work together. And so I wanted to make sure that I highlighted a couple of those things. And as it relates to the workforce, we know that's the biggest opportunity. We see it everywhere. Our entrepreneurs are crying for it. At NDC, I don't feel equipped to help them find workers. I think there's a lot of organizations that that's what I wanted to make sure that I shared.
Thank you, Renee. I was actually going to call on you, but I was looking for exactly that. I'd like to use our remaining panel time for questions from the council members to any of our 3 excellent panel members today.
Does it have to be questions? And this is Joe Fowler of the Building Trades.
Go for it.
I'm just sitting back trying to just absorb a lot of this information. And I think something that I found very unique was some of the stuff that Quellen had presented as it relates to kind of the disparities that are throughout the different types of industries. Coming from the building and construction side, I actually was very surprised to see that there was a net loss in job growth within the industry that I'm a part of, because we hear so much about diversity and inclusion within our workforce, and it just made me think, well, how do we do that if we don't have a bunch of job growth coming in? And it really seems to be off of the retirements. And then some of the other stuff is just the way those disparities carry out based off of education, or maybe the inverse of lack thereof education, and how those things continue to grow the further out you get. And, from our industry, there's several of the trades that don't really require a high level of education. For laborers, as an example, you don't even need a GED. Others, you need a GED. So I'm trying to think about how do we fit within this? And then the couple other things, something that Renee had said, well, more than just something, it was just, I wasn't really that familiar with the neighborhood development centers and your guys' approach, because some of the things that you're saying is some of the areas that I see that we need to take care of. Some of the barriers, or try to lessen the barriers coming in as an entrepreneur trying to come into the construction industry. I can't speak for all the others, but buying a computer to be an entrepreneur in a tech industry, and I don't want to minimize this, I'm not trying to say it's that simple, but it's a lot different than buying a backhoe for $250,000 to get into the construction industry, and where you have access to that capital, where you have it, where it's not, at an outrageous interest rate, and some of the bonding capacities and some of those things. And I'm wondering, again, I'm just sitting back with all the people that are in this going, do we have all the right people here that we can start moving pieces around and actually make a difference in some of the things that maybe my I don't want to say expertise, but where my talents lie, and where I can be a value. I've just been trying to kind of piece these things together, and I'm seeing some of it happen, but it's just it's interesting, and I'm very appreciative again of being on a group like this to see if we can move something forward.
Well, thank you, Joe.
I like to make a comment in regards to that. I think one of the things, and I think our people at the Building and Trades would probably agree with this, but what makes a project better because you have a bond that's required to do the project? I don't know that brings any value to the table, and maybe some reform around bonding requirements, which would take a legislative change, maybe a big move that we could make, particularly around the trades.
I've got ideas, but that's right now ain't it, but I got ideas.
Renee, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Thank you, Joe, for that. We actually have an incubator that's on the east side of St. Paul that's focused exclusively on the trades, where we have entrepreneurs that are all in the trades that have come together, that we do trainings there, et cetera. And one of the things that we're seeing as a result of that is access to capital is the biggest opportunity. And so getting our loan, so anybody that has any experience with construction and financing and any of that, please reach out, because we want to do more loans to these general contractors. And it's been difficult for us to figure that out and to provide the proper amount of technical assistance, because our lending team isn't familiar with that. And that's a whole nother story. To your point, yeah, we don't know about buying a backhoe. We know about buying an oven, right? Because we do a lot of restaurants, but really trying to be more of service to these entrepreneurs that want to be doing the trade. So would love to think through that with anybody that would be willing to help us.
We have time for maybe a couple more questions.
Chair,
I have a question for all three. Given that you guys given us a great list of places where investment is needed, if you were to think 10 years from now, from the populations you serve, what's the one thing you wish that we invest in to ensure that there's success further down the road? And it could be, a bigger picture, but thinking not just solving for today's problems, but answering for tomorrow's problems. Where would that investment go?
I love that question, Marcus. Nobody can ask a question like Marcus. I love that. So I would say, I think it's investing, getting them access to capital. I mean, it's the biggest thing. So if we could really get them access to capital that's not crippling, that's not at these ridiculously high interest rates. And if we can invest in their training and their ability, I think that goes a long way, right? Like, that's why we're thinking at NDC, how do we help them more with their managerial and their development skill? Like, how do we help them with some of those softer skills on how to hire, how to fire, what that looks like? But getting these entrepreneurs access to capital that is not cost prohibitive. And even if we could, I dare say it, do some grants to them, more grants to invest in them, I think could go a long way to get them on the road to wealth building, which is all that they're looking for. That's all they want.
Mm-hmm. I guess my answer to that question would be is that everybody needs a safe place to lay their head at the end of the day. And if you don't have safe, affordable housing, the rest of it becomes insignificant, because if you're not safe where you lay your head at the end of the day, after you've worked your 12, 14, 16, 20-hour day, and you don't feel comfortable with where you're at, you have to have safe, affordable housing. And that safe, affordable housing can be provided in many ways. Traditionally, we look at it as home ownership. Home ownership is one piece of that, but we need safe, affordable housing, workforce housing that give people a safe place to live at the end of the day, lay their head.
And because it's hard to get one, I will be inclusive of all of it. Certainly, I echo my colleagues' comments, but investing in asset building for economic mobility, which includes investing in business development, access to capital, includes housing, and it includes employment and education. You know the trends of where the workforce in Minnesota is. If we don't have workers, guess what? All the large companies are going to be leaving because they've been trying to attract people. We've invested over the years in parks and recreation. And well, now we got to invest in talent, local talent. because otherwise, we're going to lose the people that are here. I have young people working for us at CLUS who come from rural areas, graduated from college after living in Austin and other areas, and they're like, if you were to hire me, I'd be gone. Minnesota has nothing to offer to me because they're not engaged. But now that they have engagement and they have a job, and it creates a stability for them to stay here. So that's huge. We need to think about that. And with the opportunity of having so many young, the growth, let's invest in our own.
Joe, if you have one last comment to wrap up this panel, that's great. Or if that's still an earlier hand, that's fine too.
It was a comment, and it was Renee. I'm excited to maybe try to work with you and some of the capabilities you have. I 100% agree. Access to capital that's got reasonable interest rates, and to Mr. Marv Calvin, affordable housing. I agree with you. You need a safe place to rest your head. And if it's built with living wages, then you aren't short cycling it. It's really hard to say, well, you need affordable housing and then build it with minimum wage, and the people building it can't even afford to live in the affordable housing, right? So I think it's an all-inclusive look at some of this economic model and this kind of a spiral of not being able to actually live in an area that has a high standard of living. I think we all think Minnesota is a high standard, but if you can't afford to live there, then you're not part of that picture.
Marv, Renee, Ruby, thank you so much for spending the time with our council today, and we'll be sure to loop back as activities advance in these ensuing months.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and break while the subject is fresh in everyone's mind. We're going to break into small groups and get initial reactions to what you heard today. So if our moderator would go ahead and put people into the groups, we'll be in good shape. morning, but we weren't getting that done. So we unfortunately had to just beam you back out of the spaceship. Hopefully you had a chance. I neglected to do this at the outset, but each group was supposed to ask somebody sort of be their presenter now back for the full group. And, you know, it doesn't have to be exhaustive at all. We had note takers in each of the subgroups. We'll all get a chance to see the minutes from each of the subgroups. And so, but just to have a color of what was discussed, that would be great. Maybe Tracy, if you want to go ahead and start from our group, and then we'll go ahead and see who the other groups had selected.
Sure, I'm going to do the best I can. We started off with just discussing health care and the idea that, you know, in Minnesota, only 64% of women are currently participating in the labor force, and even pre-pandemic, it wasn't considerably higher than that. So we have a big opportunity to get more people into the workforce, and growing the workforce is part of growing the economy. So those are going to go together. So we just talked about the importance of childcare and making sure that families have access to childcare, and you know, people can raise happy, healthy families, even if both parents, both parties in the relationship are working. So we talked about that. So a couple of ideas that came up with were an idea for possible training of, you know, running and managing successful child care centers. I gave an example of the Initiative Foundations, the 6 of those that serve greater Minnesota, and they've done work in childcare, but they've also been very successful in using models like that to train nonprofit organizations to be sustainable in rural communities, because they also play an important role. And maybe there's an opportunity to do something similar with childcare. The possibility of starting public preschool sooner, just because of economic disparities with people having kids in childcare, but then people that are more on a higher income spectrum move their kids into preschool very quickly once they're old enough to do that. But not everyone on every income spectrum has the opportunity to do that, and that creates disparities in education as well. Another thing that we talked about, and Tulia Palmer brought this up, but she just talked about, you know, being really conscious about training healthcare workers in some communities and focusing lots of dollars and investment on that, when those people are often serving communities that are facing health disparities for other reasons. And there's something that we really need to consider there as we move forward, to not continue to perpetuate that disparity and not invest in those health disparities and only invest in the training of healthcare workers. There was a request for additional regional data on the hospitality industry, and this came from the DEED report out, as well as the McKinsey, just getting a little more granular on how we were going to see declines in that industry. And then in the healthcare industry, just because there are so many jobs in the state of Minnesota, making sure that people are on pathways that can move them continuously upward, rather than having to start and restart in training to access different types of jobs and fields. Anything that we can do to keep it as a continuous forward motion is going to be good for our economy as well as the workers. So hopefully I captured everybody, or everything that we tried to get, and thank you.
That was great, Tracy. Thanks very much. One of the other groups?
I can report out for our group. We had a good discussion. We recognize that there are many great opportunities here. Our group talked about solutions must be local. We hear about the different needs across the state. There are different types of employers that have significant job openings. When I hear about 800 job openings at a particular employer, and they're saying, can you find me these workers? Do you have these workers? That suggests to me that if those workers are not showing themselves naturally, that's a good opportunity for an employer to think about how do they invest to ensure that they get the workers that they need. If the workers do not come to you ready and capable to stand in your workforce, then that's a good time to think about how do you train for the skills that you need. For instance, apprenticeship. that's a model program. It has a great history. It demonstrates its worth time and time again. And so we're thinking that those are great opportunities. This mismatch of significant job openings to significant number of unemployed people is a different model than we've seen in previous recessions and so forth. Typically, a recession can look a little lopsided. But in this instance, there are job openings and there are unemployed workers. So how do we match or marry those two groups that we come out better and stronger from this recession? We identified numerous barriers that will continue to hinder this match, particularly in housing. If you do not have adequate and safe housing, it interferes with absolutely everything. A worker cannot work remotely, which is becoming more plentiful at this time. We believe that we will continue to see individuals with the ability to work remotely, but you can't do that if you do not have stable housing. You cannot, it can interfere with you educating your children. It can interfere with absolutely everything, and definitely it will impact your health. If you don't have reliable housing, it puts you at greater risk even for COVID. So recognizing the total impact of these critical services not being available has a way of crippling the economy and staggering and not allowing us to grow quite as quickly. Also, we pointed out the critical need for childcare. Again, if you do not have a safe space to, if you have to drive 50 miles to find a reliable daycare, it interferes with the kind of positions you can be available for. So just doing sort of a short inventory on what are those critical pieces that are absolutely essential, no matter who you are or where you are, to looking at how do we match the existing job openings to the available talent pool of unemployed workers.
Thanks so much, Rosalind. Who would be representing the last group?
I was voluntold to do that. This is Nanoko. Hi, everybody. So our group, similar, a lot of echoing of some of the other folks who have spoken about childcare and housing, safety net, et cetera. One of the things that we really did talk about was ensuring accessibility for organizations, companies, individuals who are closest to the communities being impacted. And so how do we make sure that the resources are going to be allocated quickly, efficiently, and to the folks who may not necessarily have the resources themselves to go and seek them out. I might be a little bit biased coming from a nonprofit background here, but that is something that I think is really critical for us. In particular, we talked about sort of how do we help address asset and wealth building to rural and outstate Minnesotans, BIPOC communities, especially those without generational wealth. We also recognize that switching jobs or even industries is exceptionally hard, and it may not necessarily be an immediate need or thing. But can there be any incentives or safety net, both for employers as well as job seekers, to help them minimize the risk of through like investment in skill building, rebuilding and education? And we talked about how we build talent and retain them and utilizing the short-term opportunities for long-term impact. Jody just touched quickly on childcare impact. I assume that her comments was going to be very similar to what the other two groups have said, so I'll say that. And then lastly, you know, I think we're all really excited about the solutions brainstorming aspect of it, because it's clearly a need, and we want to make sure that we're getting a recommendation quickly to the folks in need as fast as possible.
Thanks very much. Does anybody have any further observations on today's work that they'd like to share with the full council? If not, our meeting next week, we're going to be working to understand the impact of the pandemic's effect in the BIPOC communities and identify values that the community should hold, the council should hold as it continues to work toward recommendations. But thank you all for your attention today and look forward to our continuing work together.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.